Welcome to This Week in X, presented by Crushing Comics. I'm your host, Peter, and I am here with my friends, colleagues, and co-hosts, Harry and Tyler, and we are here to talk about this week's issue, X Factor number 6, out on the 6th of January, 2021. So spoiler warning, we're going to talk about every possible thing in this issue, other things happening in the X-Line, and everything that's happened in the X-Line pretty much ever. It's all fair game, as well as other events in the Marvel Universe. If you're looking for us talking about the other X-Men issue out this week, which was Hellions number 8, take a look elsewhere on the channel. That is a separate This Week in X discussion. Let's get started with X Factor number 6 with just our lightning round from the gut reactions. Tyler.
I enjoyed this issue, but not as much as last issue. I think for me, the main story, the A plot, did not quite capture my attention, but the various characters, moments, and the side plots were actually more interesting or very interesting to me. Baldion continues to deliver stellar work on the art here. And it is by no means a bad book. If last issue was A+, this is A.
Harry.
I love this. This is my favorite X book right now by far. This whole issue just made me happy, both with its structure, kind of really committing to the detective and investigating theme of the book, and just all the tiny interactions and Baldion's art. Just every little bit worked really well for me. So I'm going to be the de facto cheerleader this issue.
Well, you and I are going to fight because I'm going to be the de facto cheerleader of this issue. I'm obsessed with this. I think it is so pitch perfect. I've been reading I'm in mid-1986 in my full X-Men reread with the kid. And reading this issue, the absolute density in every panel of people interacting with each other, bouncing off of each other. This is what X-Men was about for so long that made so many people love X-Men. And Leah Williams understands it perfectly. And I think that we've done that thing that she does on many series where we've gotten past the initial point where it's just like funny hee-haw gags, which I get now is her way of kind of establishing their personalities. And now we're at the point where I just feel constant delivery on all of them developing. It's a big cast and they really all feel addressed. And I would agree that Baldion just continues to move up my list of favorites. Maybe that's a good place to start just because there's so much to talk about in this issue. Baldion, who we've talked about previously as being occasionally a little bit gawky in the way he draws characters. I feel like the expressions here were so revealing, so personalized to each of the characters. He did so much with each of them that I just couldn't get enough.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree. And there was this page towards the end of the issue, which actually was like, oh my God, this is like J.H. Williams level of like designing panels, because it has this Siren's hair was like doing all the panel division.
Oh yeah, so cool,
so good.
I did a double take. Like, is that like I was like, Baldion, really? Like I couldn't even believe that layout was coming from him, and it just shows how much range he has.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's quickly becoming one of my favorite superhero artists right now. For me, like if we're talking faces and what have you, I think he does amazing work with iBoy. Who's just super happy. And there's a page where he's like it's like a jokey page where he puts on this headband and has this expression, but there's like such this like weird power and energy to it. It's such a good way to end the page and end that scene. It just like that's the thing I keep thinking of is how well he depicts all of these different levels of energy and emotions and intensity, and just they're all different and they're all just done so well.
And the other thing that I feel like we have to comment upon, or at least I do, is Israel Silva's colors, which we've talked about in the past, but I think with Baldion, you can go wrongly coloring him because of the way he does his characters. If it's too flat, it just feels like a cartoon that doesn't really have depth. And if you go too shiny or too bright or put too much of a sheen on them, they start to kind of just feel like these weird misshapen dolls. And I think there's a middle ground here that Silva strikes perfectly, where he does really good depth. I'm looking at the beginning of their investigation on the ground where there's the panel of them kind of looking under the body bag. And Silva does this really brilliant edge lighting on each of their hair to kind of distinguish the stack of them. And he just makes sure that none of them is so defined by their light that it's all kind of like reflection. Every one of them has their own amount of depth, and it kind of gives their own skin tones definition. And that's just, it's what I'm really looking for. I really like a really saturated colorist to begin with, but I just think there's a lot of really clever things being done here with skin tone, with edge lighting to make people stand out without just doing the every surface is glossy and reflective thing that so many modern colorists get stuck doing.
Nope.
Oh, this book looks so good. Sorry. Another much more obvious than that, but like his depiction of super speed, or it's just hyper speed with North Star, is just very, very cool. It's just like this moving blur that's always like mid motion, but it feels like a different depiction of that than you see with other artists, because it's not as like sharp, I guess, if that would make sense, but it feels more in the moment.
So in this case, is it Baldion's art or is it the colorist who did I
think it's got to be a collaboration of the two.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
because I think both have to work together for that image to work, right? Because I think
sure.
Baldion's ink his own work. Yeah, he's the artist, so he ink his own work.
well, and so much of the time when you see a motion blur, like if we're on the first or second page and we see him running around while he's speaking on the phone, you get a digital motion blur of a figure, right? Like it's a figure that clearly was somewhere and they kind of like ghosted edge of the part of the back, or maybe the penciler even did that. But this is very different, and that's what's so striking about it, that if you look at the edge that's coming off of him, it's like color separated, but it also kind of looks like a sound wave, which almost like implies how quickly he's moving around. There's this kind of like sound to it, and then it's colored almost so that it's like a negative impression of itself, and it's just really different. It reminds me of some of the work we've seen on Daredevil, where different artists kind of do different versions of his blind sight. This is just a really neat different version of super speed that was fun.
Yeah, I was reading it and I just literally, I don't feel like I've seen this power depicted like this before, and I don't know how often you get that feeling when you're reading superhero comics. It just felt new, which I was like, this is amazing. This is awesome. Like, this book is really good.
Well, I'm talking about...
He's also playing with a lot of different perspective here, right? You have a shot of like right from the top in the Healing Gardens, and then there's this shot from the bottom of the boneyard. And he's playing with camera angles here, like throughout this issue, and it works really, really well.
And if you recall, we complimented him the last time around in the way he beautifully echoed the data page of the Boneyard on the page in his layout, and even more of that here. So I want to talk about something else new, but I want to transition us to talking to the story a little bit. Mm-hmm. So the first chunk here is that they're investigating another death of Siryn's, right? She died at the end of the last issue, but we don't pick up there. That's already been investigated. She's already been revived. It's like a week later now, and she's dead again, and X-Factor goes to investigate it. And we get this really, for me, delightful sequence of them trying to interact with the human crime scene investigators, but we get to see how each one of them is like the perfect detective in their own way, including talking about brilliant layouts, probably the best version I've seen anybody do of iBoy's powers, where it shows him seeing the person he's talking to, but then all of the details around him in this kind of almost multicellular explosion of circles to mirror the way that it must seem like visual input comes into his brain. And it just, he's one of these characters that could be so dorky and goofy, but it sold it to me so hard. And again, through the combination of Williams writing a really clever script of him saying, I can see anything. What do you want me to see? Dust mites? Well, what do they look like? I'm not sure. And then Baldion perfectly finding the way to show us what that feels like in the art.
Yeah, I think this is the first time we see a visualization of like iBoy's power. And I have to say, this is really cool.
And I was introduced in Jason Aaron's Wolverine and the X-Men. Yeah, and I like that run a lot, but iBoy is not really a super impactful part of it. So this series, I'm like, wow, they're really making good on this character's, I guess, potential. I mean, you're really making some cool stuff out of this somewhat kind of jokey character from the other book. It's just, yeah.
But there's
also jokey here.
Yeah, he's still funny.
Okay,
it's not a joke.
He has a function.
Yeah,
he's doing things. Like I love that this book is really committing to the fact that it is an investigative detective kind of group or agency. There are other. I'm not throwing shade on Marauders. That book's great, but like we haven't had a lot of pirate stuff in Marauders for a long time. And this book is committing to its central theme, which is like we are investigating mutant deaths, which is cool.
Yeah.
Gosh, I want to leap ahead to so many things, but I want to close out this opening part. So I think part of what's so intriguing to me is, so Boy, natural detective. Rachel, natural detective, right? Because she's got, she's not only a psychic, but she can detect emotions and things. And this is made explicit later in panels, but let's just stick with this opening part. But here you have Prodigy, who's kind of being that prodigal kid who's like, I could do all of this. Can you just let me do this? Can I do this? And putting North Star in the position of having to respond to it when North Star is that kid. Like through North Star's entire history, he's always the one who's like, can we speed it up? Can we do it a different way? Can we this? And Leah Williams, to her credit, brilliantly flips that on his head. And you see the puzzlement on North Star's face from Baldion as he's like, is this what I'm like? And he keeps switching to French as if that's going to throw Prodigy off, or is he just code switching? And Prodigy's like, yes, I understand French.
Yeah.
And it's just a great bit. It's just such a good bit.
And it sort of speaks, I mean, that happens a bit later, but this is they are forming a family unit within X Factor.
Yes.
And that is what is so wonderful about this issue and the interactions in general. I mean, we open the issue with them having breakfast, which is like, in the past, Claremont would be like baseball game or practice session in the danger room. But in this era, I mean, in Docs, in Rocks, we are having mealtime as a family, as a bonding time. You have the Summers dinner with Wolverine. You have the New Mutants having breakfast, drinking lots of coffee, and you have X Factor here having breakfast. And iBoy asking Prodigy to read random stuff.
What a great little moment that was. It's like, your voice, I just love your voice. And you almost have to be like, is it flirting or is it just this genuine moment between two friends where he's like, no, really? And it kind of doesn't matter. It's just such a great, stupid little detail that we will always remember, that Prodigy is a really beautiful reading voice. Like Leah Williams gave us that. Now we have it.
I love that. Yeah. I love that so much. And to Tyler's point, I just love that this book is also embracing this run, this status quo's just emphasis on family and kind of warmth, and just having these characters just bond in ways you don't usually get because they're being attacked by robots or whatever. It's nice.
Yeah.
And Prodigy is now forever going to sound like the Allstate guy.
What's his name? No, I'll think of it.
Dennis Haysbert.
Dennis Hayes, that's right. You got it, man.
I Googled it, so because I don't know his name. I remember him as the Allstate guy or the first black president in 24.
Oh, he's on 24. Cool.
Yeah.
So we get this interesting moment when they get back from the investigations where Prodigy wants to stand close enough to Celia Rise to kind of absorb all of her autopsy knowledge. I have a lot to say about that scene, but it rolls into this concept again that Prodigy's pushing. He wants to establish their own body garden.
Yeah.
It's so crazy.
It's such a strange beat in the middle, and there's so many things happening. I don't know.
Kind of morbid, right?
I'm into it. It's bizarre. It's just like, you want to do what? But it's a good point. It's like, we've never actually considered, like, do the mutants, their bodies decay differently? Is there something here? Like, this book just knocks it out of the park with these interesting little side avenues and tangents and like interesting bits that you just consider. And this is like a really good example of that.
So I have a question about Prodigy's power now. Does he remember them, or is it transient?
He retains them permanently, but I don't know if he would have retained permanently things that he knew before his resurrection. Like, when he lost his power, the whole bit was he's still an expert in all the things he was already expert in.
And that's because the Cuckoos basically unlocked his fullest his block. So when they resurrect him, did they unlock that block too? Or you remember that story? I mean, I remember because I just read it last week. The one where Emma said, "You want to have the block removed? I'll remove this," and they play out a what if scenario of him remembering everything, every powers or whatever that he has.
Well, I think part of the answer to that question might include how he died and came back. We get a little moment of that here, where he's like, "I just died around the same time, Loa and Blindfold did," and they're like, "Mm-mm." So I think that it's meant to be a mystery. But I comparing this, I don't want to compare comic against comic, so I won't. But just we get 2 pages in the mortuary where we get a really good redefinition of his power for people who maybe don't understand. And then we get 2 pages talking about this body graveyard, but instead of just being some big panels establishing people saying yes, no, we get this fully formed, cogent argument where he actually brings people along to his side. I can see some readers saying, like, this was kind of a waste, 2 pages about mutant decomposition, really, but like, there's just so much there. And even though Prodigy is the main one speaking, we get to see through other people's faces that he's not just working on persuading Northstar, he's working on persuading everyone.
Yeah.
Well,
that's great.
I just love that scene because Northstar is, over here, his husband is basically saying, well, he's becoming a dad.
It's one of the best faces in the book. It's such a beautiful little, like, amused moment. It's so good.
Now we come to Siryn re-entering the scene. They verify that she was definitely dead again. And so now she's been revived. Of course, a classic X Factor member from Peter David's run. And the team is interrogating her. And there's so many wonderful layers here. Before I even kind of define it, I want to turn it over to you because there's so many things to pick apart. What did you think about this scene with Siryn and the whole cast before she breaks away with Polaris?
Harry?
I just thought it was really interesting that we've got a book where a character is dying so frequently and kind of delving into that. And, I really liked Peter David's X Factor. So I just enjoyed having this character back and reading her again. But like, yeah, it's like genuinely interesting. Like I was very invested in seeing what happened next. And it's very funny that they keep pulling her away from the window so she doesn't see the dead bodies. That's a great beat. It's just like, don't go over there, stay over here.
Well, and this is also the second overlapping panel that we saw this week. Like we saw an overlapping panel
of, like, you mean the word balloons overlap?
Yeah, the word balloons. Yeah. Sorry, overlapping word balloons. So we saw Aurora wearing the X Factor uniform in Excalibur, and she's wearing it here now. And I just love that connective tissues between issues. They don't have to say anything. It's just like, she's now part of the team and she's now part of the family. I love that. And I also loved, like, this is clearly a continuation of a story that Peter David establishes as a status quo for Teresa. Because
Williams has read it and she has taken some notes.
Yeah.
Like, she perfectly lines this up with where we left these characters, Lorna and Teresa, off when they were last together.
Exactly. And even in the opening quote, right, there was this star besides Siryn and all redacted. But we all know, everyone who has read the X Factor know what that redacted, name is. It's Morrigan.
Yeah. Well, look, we've come to the part that happens in almost every episode where I have the scene where I have 3 distinct things to say about it. So let me try to do it in an efficient way. So this Siryn scene, again, only about 2.5 pages. Super fascinating because there's 3 distinct things happening. One, Harry already addressed, which is just the gaggy, funny thing of keeping her away from the window. Doesn't really matter. She's been the Morgan. Is she going to be that upset by the dead bodies? But the book kind of waves hands that it's not only that she might be upset, but let's not even talk about this with anybody yet. And like, let's not even bring it up. And it's funny. It's got like a rule of 3 things. It happens once. And then they're like, she's coming back this way because Williams is funny. So that's one thing, which we've already talked about. But here's the thing I found so interesting. We have Siryn being like, we were X Factor. Why are you X Factor? But then it has this X Factor basically rebutting, y'all were investigating. You were terrible at investigating. We're so much better at this than you are. And we get this brilliant brilliant page from Baldion of them all knocked back to their single distinct color, talking about how each one of them is a perfect detective. But to get there, we had to get through this scene to see Siryn's objections, because every one of them noticed something different about her objections. And it's one of those scenes that you can go back and reread, because the end of the scene brings you back to the beginning of the scene. So not only is the scene itself dense, but it actually rewards you for reading it closely and for rereading it, because you can go back and see how Siryn revealed these things to each one of the members. That to me is peak comic making. Like when I say I want X-Men to be the best comics that I read every given week, this is what I'm looking for.
And then we superimpose Peter trying to fling the masterwork last week here.
I said I wasn't going to compare it to anybody in specific. Density of plot, density of ideas, density of conceptual stuff, density of character work. And density of gags.
Of art.
Use visual storytelling to get that all across while they're doing everything else, like using color to kind of get more of that character across, and I do love that this team is quietly stacked. Like each one of these people are great at what they do.
And it's Prodigy is like, I can do everything that you guys do.
Prodigy's just an all-man. He's just like, he can do whatever. You just give him whatever he's got to do. He'll get it done.
But then my final comment on this scene before we move it on, which we could have done a half hour on this scene as far as I'm concerned. Baldion's art of Siryn, just again, a totally other level. I thought Chris Anka dropped by to do a couple of pages. The scene where her brows are furrowed and then she screams, that is not like a normal Baldion face. And it shows that his range is just increasing and that he can use different styles to differentiate these characters. It would have been really easy for Teresa to look a lot like Rachel, like red hair, those kind of fair features. And yet she never once looks like Rachel in the sequence. And Silva's coloring of how vivid he makes her costume and the way that he gets her hair to stand out against it and the way she almost pops off the background against all the different backgrounds, and then the use of her sonic power, like they just went off. And then to follow that up with that J.H. Williams III-esque page that's coming 2 pages from now. I mean, the art, they just went off on art in this issue. That's it. I'm done.
I agree. It looks incredible. It's such a good looking book.
I mean, there's nothing more to add. I mean, it's just like, just look at the changes in Lorna's face and Teresa's face in these sequence, these few pages, and you can see the change. No word balloons, and you can see the change. That is what is so brilliant about this whole thing.
Teresa looks so mad in that page. Maybe she is, but I was wondering if she's been possessed by an evil spirit. I was like, you look so mad.
Well, let's talk about it. I mean, where do we end up here? Why does she keep dying? What is her motivation for hypnotizing Lorna to leave her alone? And what is the significance of her being followed by this flock of ravens or crows at the end? Is she full on Morgan, or is there something else happening here?
I don't know. I mean, the crows made a symbol in the sky, and it is the Trinity knot, which I think when she first encountered the young lady was wearing a necklace with that Trinity knot.
Wow, Tyler.
She was using
wow, jeez, dude. You are on it today.
She was using that charm to call Morgan, and so I mean, so the last page clearly established that this is Morgan, and the birds flying, I guess because they're all black, they're supposed to be crows or ravens, and that is also part of Morgan's, I wouldn't say ammo, but like that's what symbolizes her. Because remember, I think when I think in X Factor when Siryn basically was told to her powers has to do with the ravens, kill the ravens, and you will defeat her. So yeah, so these all things. This last page basically ties in to the fact that, I mean, or basically says this is not Teresa, this is Morgan, and I think, and Morgan in X Factor wanted to die. She's just tired of living. Like she's like, I don't want to live anymore. Just kill me, or something like that. Or she has been switching bodies quite a few times. So I'm not 100% sure of her motivation here, but did she just want to die and not get resurrected? And if she gets resurrected, why is she being resurrected instead of Theresa, because the 5 has something to do with this, right? And so I think that is the question mark, like what is happening here?
And just wow, it's fascinating to me because this book, again, there's enough inter-family casual stuff happening that I'm ready to come back just for that. But now we have a great hook, and it's really similar to Hellions this week in that there's this great hook about what's going on with Teresa. There was a great hook there about AI and Nanny, stealing the robot baby, and but there's also just the team dynamics. And I mean, I cannot wait for it. Seems unfair that these two books come out the same week as each other, because I don't know if I care about any of the other X-Men titles that are going to come out between the next 2 issues of this. Like, I want the next issue of X Factor this very moment, for not just for story reasons, for art reasons too. I basically want to see Baldian and Silva drawing and coloring Siryn for a full 20 pages next issue. Give me more. Like,
yeah. I love that ending because it's introducing deception and kind of like two-faced machinations into this cast of characters, which I just feel like they're going to crush it at next issue. It's going to be very good. But then also I like that it's kind of like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I can't remember, like this is like, it's mutant on mutant conflict, but without resorting to actual violence, which they've still stayed away from. So it's kind of like introducing drama on the island without like breaking that cardinal rule, which I think was kind of neat.
There isn't any cardinal rule.
Just figure speech. Yeah.
It's not one of the cardinal rules.
Yeah.
So having been through this pretty thoroughly, I still think there's 100 other moments we could talk about. One last go round. Anything else you want to talk about from this issue, Tyler?
Yes. Who is Tommy in the messages exchange between
Speed from New Avengers?
Speed, yeah, it's Speed, yeah.
Wait.
Or Young Avengers,
Young Avengers.
I've not read
Young Avengers.
That's why.
Oh, it's so good.
So Prodigy befriends Speed in Gilman's run of Young Avengers. I want to say, yeah.
Because
I knew it.
It's like a break issue between McKelvey's arcs and Young Avengers, and they have like a bond. That's actually kind of the most Prodigy I've read is in Young Avengers, but
because I thought it was that rainbow hair Moloch that died during Mutant Massacre.
Oh man, you're always ready for a deep cut.
I so wish it was that instead. Are you kidding me?
I was like, why is that Moloch calling him? I was like,
This is just the kind of book that's like, I think a lot of these X books are very good and you just kind of enjoy them passively sometimes, but not to throw shit at Excalibur, but something like that. And then this is a book that's just like firing, just doing so much, so well. Like I had such a great time reading it. Like it is another level. It just is.
Well, the final thing I want to come back to is the use of Daken here. And I talked about it a little bit earlier, but here's a character who has been massively a problem if we take him for all of his past deeds, right? So you kind of have 2 options. You totally wash that and be like, that wasn't me, I was possessed, it was the Shadow King or whatever. Or you continue to use him in a way that doesn't totally redeem him and makes you still kind of threatened by or nervous of him. And I think that Williams is walking a tightrope with that right now because she can't make him too romantic. A certain number of fans won't respond to that well. Now, of course, there's characters throughout the history of Marvel Comics and all comics who've done reprehensible things and still get to be heroes. Namor drowned most of New York in the 1940s, and then again, Wakanda in 2012, but we still are allowed to see Namor as a hero sometimes, not to compare atrocities. But I just feel like Leo Williams is being very careful to never say that Daken didn't do all of the child murdering and sexual assaulting that he used to do. And she's not saying that he's just a romantic hunk. She's letting him linger in the background of these scenes. She's playing the connection he has with Aurora and hardly anybody else. And it just feels like a fuse that's lit that eventually we're going to have to contend with more. He's not just here just to kind of growl at people occasionally. There's a reason she's using him. And so it could go bad. It could go good. I don't know. And I think it's going to be several issues before we do. But right now, I'm really appreciating that she's resisting the urge to just turn him into a full-fledged hunk. She's still playing him on that tightrope of creepiness.
It's a really good point.
I agree.
Yeah.
I did not think of it that way, but I agree.
I do like that they haven't gone full in on just, oh man, Dawkins so hot. He's like the hunk of the book. It is like a more nuanced thing than that. I kind of forgot about all those atrocities, but in Dawkins' case, but yeah, that's gonna be. I feel like it's more lean toward rehabilitation. That's my personal prediction.
We'll see, though. Like, it doesn't. Who knows? We haven't really had him comment on the subject too much yet. And to that point, Baldian is drawing him so hunky that you can feel the visceral discomfort that some fans and readers are having with him, because he looks hot. And for people who think that, you know, comic art is hot to them, they're like having trouble reconciling that in the same way that a garbage human being in the real world who is hot gives us funny feelings. And I just think it's all very clever. So that's our discussion of X Factor number 6. It brings us to the end of this week in X. If you enjoyed being a part of our discussion, good. That's why we discuss it. We hope that you will subscribe so that you can hear more of this in the coming weeks as we talk about the rest of the X line. We hope you leave a comment. We really, really like the discussion continuing in the comments. Sometimes you have different thoughts on the issue that cause us to reflect and then come at the next one differently, which is really cool. I think it's part of why X-Men is better when it's read together. So on the behalf of myself, of Tyler, of Harry, I want to thank you so much for being a part of this week in X about X Factor 6, and we hope to see you again next week. Be well.
Bye.